The Galactic Combat Federation had ruled for 3,000 cycles. Their laws were absolute, their technology supreme, and their arrogance boundless. In all that time, no species had ever dared challenge their most sacred regulation, the purity of combat doctrine. Warriors entered the arena with only their natural bodies and approved weapons. Nothing else. No enhancements, no modifications, no external additions of any kind. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood in the staging area beneath the Nexus arena, watching the holographic display that showed the massive crowd above. 50 million beings from across the galaxy had gathered to witness what they believed would be humanity's final humiliation. The Federation Council had made it clear that this wasn't just a trial by combat. It was an execution disguised as sport. Her opponent paced in his own staging area across the complex. Fraktor the Unstoppable, champion of the Zephyrian Empire and holder of the Triple Crown of Galactic Combat. He stood 12 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton gleaming under the arena lights. His forearms ended in razor-sharp claws that could slice through titanium like paper. His species had evolved for war, their bodies natural weapons that had conquered 17 star systems before joining the Federation. Sarah ran her fingers along the smooth bone plates that now formed her chest armor. 6 months ago, those same bones had been inside Fraktor's body. 6 months ago, she had done something that shocked the galaxy and enraged the Federation Council beyond measure. The memory was still fresh. The mining station on Europa 7, where she had been stationed as part of the human diplomatic escort. Fraktor had arrived with his warband, claiming the mineral rights under some obscure Federation law. The human miners, families who had worked those tunnels for generations, were given 48 hours to evacuate. Sarah had tried to negotiate. She had followed protocol, filed appeals, even contacted the Federation Council directly. Every request was denied. Every appeal was dismissed. The law was clear, they said. Humanity was a junior member species. They had no standing to challenge Zephyrian claims. But Fraktor made one crucial mistake. He decided to make an example. The attack came without warning. Zephyrian warriors descended on the mining complex while families were still packing their belongings. They claimed it was to expedite the evacuation process. But Sarah watched through her visor as claws tore through civilian shelters. She heard the screams of children as warriors herded them like livestock toward the transport ships. That was when Sarah broke every regulation in the human military handbook. She had challenged Fraktor to single combat, invoking an ancient Zephyrian law that even the Federation couldn't ignore. The right of personal honor challenge. If she won, the mining rights would revert to humanity. If she lost, the humans would leave without compensation and never return. Fraktor had laughed. A sound like grinding stone that echoed through the mining tunnels. He accepted immediately, confident that a soft human would provide amusing entertainment before her inevitable death. The fight lasted 4 hours. Sarah had trained her entire life for combat, but she knew her limitations. Humans were clever, adaptable, and stubbornly persistent. But they weren't built for war like the Zephyrians. She couldn't match Fraktor's strength or speed. She couldn't penetrate his natural armor with conventional weapons, so she got creative. The mining complex had industrial equipment designed to cut through asteroid rock. Plasma torches, gravitational field generators, and molecular disassemblers. Sarah led Fraktor through a running battle across the entire facility, using every piece of machinery as a weapon. She collapsed tunnel sections to slow him down. She redirected mining lasers to blind him. She used the zero-gravity work areas to her advantage, bouncing between surfaces while he struggled to maintain his footing. But it was the industrial fabricator that gave her the winning move. Fraktor cornered her in the manufacturing bay, his claws inches from her throat. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his crystalline armor cracked and scarred, but he was still strong enough to tear her apart. Sarah could see the anticipation in his compound eyes as he prepared for the killing blow. Instead, she triggered the fabricator's emergency cycle. The machine had been programmed to create replacement habitat modules. In its memory banks were the complete molecular specifications for every component, including the atmospheric processors that generated breathable air for human workers. Sarah had reprogrammed it during their chase. Instead of oxygen and nitrogen, the fabricator flooded the bay with pure chlorine gas. Humans could hold their breath. Zephyrians couldn't. Their respiratory system required constant gas exchange to maintain their crystalline structure. Without it, their exoskeleton began to dissolve from the inside out. Vractor died slowly, his armor cracking apart as his body chemistry collapsed. With his final breath, he cursed Sarah in the old Zephyrian tongue, promising that his spirit would haunt her across the stars. Sarah had taken that curse seriously, but not in the way he intended. When the medical teams arrived, she made a request that horrified both humans and aliens alike. She wanted Vractor's body, not for burial, not for study, but for materials. Using tools and techniques that predated the Federation by millennia, Sarah spent 3 months carefully processing Vractor's remains. She carved his ribcage into overlapping plates that formed a breastplate. She shaped his arm bones into bracers and shoulder guards. She ground his claws into arrowheads and knife blades. The Federation Council was outraged. They accused her of desecration, of violating the dignity of death, of practices too barbaric for civilized space. They demanded she remove the bone armor and face punishment for her crimes. Sarah refused. She cited human cultural traditions that predated the Federation Charter. She pointed out that Vractor had died in honorable combat, and that wearing the bones of a worthy opponent was the highest form of respect her species could offer. The legal battle lasted months. Every species in the Federation had an opinion. Some called for Sarah's immediate execution. Others argued that human customs, however distasteful, were protected under the Cultural Preservation Act. Finally, the council reached a compromise that satisfied no one. Sarah could keep her bone armor, but she would have to prove its legitimacy in the arena. If she could defeat 3 Federation champions while wearing Vractor's remains, her actions would be considered lawful. If she lost, humanity would be expelled from the Federation and banned from civilized space. Sarah accepted immediately. Now, standing in the staging area with the crowd roaring above, she understood the true scope of what she faced. This wasn't just about her actions or even humanity's place in the Federation. This was about challenging 3,000 years of established order. The bone armor felt warm against her skin, as if some echo of Vractor's fighting spirit still lingered in the crystalline structure. Sarah smiled grimly as the arena doors began to open. Let them call her barbaric. Let them call her savage. She was about to show the galaxy exactly what humans were capable of when they stopped playing by someone else's rules. The arena floor was a masterpiece of alien engineering. Adaptive terrain that could shift between environments with the touch of a button. One moment it resembled the crystal caves of Andromeda Prime. The next, the floating platforms of the Void Dancer's homeworld. The Federation used it to ensure that every fighter faced challenges suited to their species' weaknesses. For Sarah's first match, they had chosen something deliberately insulting, a replica of Earth's African savanna, complete with artificial sunlight and scattered acacia trees. The message was clear. They wanted to remind everyone watching that humans were nothing more than evolved prey animals who had somehow stumbled into the stars. Sarah emerged from the entrance, tunneled to a wave of sound that threatened to overwhelm her enhanced hearing protection. 50 million voices creating a wall of noise that vibrated through the arena's structure. Most were cheering for her destruction, but she caught fragments of something else. Smaller pockets of support from species who had their own grievances against Federation arrogance. Across the arena, her first opponent stepped into the artificial sunlight. Captain Thane Murdoch represented everything wrong with the Federation's military philosophy. He was human, but he had undergone the full conversion process to become a Federation loyalist. Cybernetic implants enhanced his reflexes to superhuman levels. Synthetic muscle fibers had replaced most of his organic tissue. His bones had been reinforced with alien metallurgy that made them stronger than steel. The Federation had chosen him carefully. Sarah wasn't just fighting for humanity's survival. She was fighting against the Federation's vision of what humanity should become. Thane was their poster child, proof that humans could be valuable if they abandoned their primitive nature and embraced technological perfection. Lieutenant Chen, Thane's voice carried across the arena floor through his vocal amplifiers. I want you to know I take no pleasure in this. You're a fine soldier, but you've chosen to represent everything backward about our species. Sarah checked the bone armor one final time. Vractor's ribs formed overlapping plates across her chest and back, their crystalline structure now fused with biocompatible polymers that her engineering team had developed during the preparation months. His arm bones protected her shoulders and forearms, carved with intricate patterns that served both ceremonial and practical purposes. The weight distribution felt perfect, as if the armor had been designed specifically for her body. "I represent what we were before we decided to beg for scraps at the Federation table," Sarah replied, her voice carrying clearly in the arena's acoustics. "What we could be again if we remembered how to fight for ourselves." Thane shook his head, genuine sadness in his expression. "That kind of thinking is exactly why the Federation Council sees us as barbarians. We're better than our ancestors, Sarah. We don't have to be prisoners of our primitive impulses." The arena's combat timer began its countdown. 60 seconds until the match began. Sarah used the time to study her opponent's movement patterns. Thane was faster than any unenhanced human could be, but his cybernetics created subtle tells. The way his left knee locked between steps suggested a mechanical limitation in his prosthetic leg. His enhanced reflexes had a predictable delay pattern that she might be able to exploit. "You know what the difference is between us, Thane?" Sarah asked as she drew her primary weapon. It was a hybrid design her team had created specifically for this tournament. The blade was forged from Vraktor's claws, while the handle incorporated human engineering that the Federation had never seen before. "You replaced your humanity. I learned to weaponize mine." The timer reached 0, and Thane moved with inhuman speed. His cybernetic legs launched him across the arena floor in a leap that covered 40 meters in seconds. His enhanced arms swung molecular-edged blades that could cut through battleship armor. The attack was perfectly calculated, precisely executed, and utterly predictable. Sarah wasn't there when he landed. She had rolled sideways the moment his muscles tensed for the jump, using the slight delay in his cybernetic coordination to anticipate his trajectory. While Thane recalibrated his position, Sarah was already moving, staying low and using the scattered acacia trees for cover. "Stand and fight," Thane called out, frustration creeping into his amplified voice. "This isn't a game of hide and seek." Sarah smiled as she circled through the artificial vegetation. This was exactly why the Federation didn't understand humans. They thought combat was about specifications and capabilities. They reduced warfare to a mathematical equation where the side with better technology always won. They had never learned to think like a hunter. Sarah had grown up in the Australian outback before joining the military. Her grandfather had been a traditional tracker who taught her to read the subtle signs that most people missed. The way dust settled after footsteps, the pattern of disturbed vegetation, the slight changes in air pressure that warned of approaching movement. Those skills had been dismissed as primitive by her Federation instructors. Why learn to track when you had orbital sensors? Why study natural camouflage when you had optical cloaking? Why understand the psychology of hunting when you had tactical computers that could predict enemy behavior? Now facing an opponent who relied entirely on technological advantages, those primitive skills were her greatest asset. Thane moved through the arena like a machine, which is exactly what he had become. His cybernetic enhancements made him faster and stronger, but they also made him predictable. He couldn't help but optimize every action, to choose the mathematically perfect response to each situation. Sarah used that against him. She led him on a chase through the terrain, always staying just out of reach. Every time he closed the distance, she would disappear around a tree or behind a rock formation. She wasn't running away. She was studying his patterns, learning the rhythm of his enhanced reflexes. After 10 minutes of pursuit, she finally saw what she was looking for. Thane's left leg favored certain stepping patterns to compensate for the mechanical limitations in his prosthetic knee. The delay was less than 1/10 of a second, but it was consistent. Sarah made her move. She led Thane around a cluster of rocks, then suddenly reversed direction, timing her attack for the exact moment when his left leg would be locked in its mechanical cycle. The blade forged from Vraktor's claws sliced through the cybernetic joint with surgical precision. Thane stumbled but didn't fall. His enhanced reflexes kicked in, adapting to the damage and redistributing his weight. He spun toward Sarah with his molecular-edged weapons, their cutting surfaces humming with deadly energy. But Sarah was already gone, moving to his blind spot while he compensated for the damaged leg. Her second strike severed the power cables feeding his right arm's enhancement systems. "How?" Thane gasped as his cybernetic advantages began failing one by one. "Your reflexes aren't fast enough. Your weapons aren't sharp enough. The math doesn't work." Sarah paused in her attack, genuinely sorry for what she had to do next. Thane wasn't evil. He was just a human who had been convinced that humanity wasn't good enough on its own. "The math assumes I'm trying to overpower you," Sarah explained as she maneuvered for the finishing strike. "But I was never trying to be stronger or faster. I was trying to be smarter." Her final attack targeted the main processor hub that coordinated all of Thane's cybernetic systems. The bone blade pierced the armored casing and delivered a precisely calculated electromagnetic pulse that Sarah had built into the weapon's structure. Thane collapsed as his enhanced systems shut down in cascade failure. He wasn't dead, but without his cybernetics, he was just a confused man with a lot of very expensive medical hardware that no longer worked. The arena fell silent. 50 million beings who had expected to watch a human primitive get torn apart by Federation technology instead witnessed something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about strength and weakness. Sarah stood over her defeated opponent, Fractor's bone armor gleaming in the artificial sunlight. She had just proven that human ingenuity could overcome technological superiority, that primitive tactics could defeat advanced systems, that sometimes the old ways were better than the new ones. But this was only the first match. 2 more champions waited, and the Federation Council would not make the same mistake twice. Her next opponent wouldn't be human. They would choose something designed specifically to counter everything she had just demonstrated. Sarah looked up at the viewing stands where the Federation Council sat in their ornate box seats. She could see their alien faces twisted with rage and disbelief. Good. Let them be angry. Let them be afraid. She was just getting started. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize Thane, while Sarah waited in the recovery area beneath the arena. His cybernetic systems had suffered catastrophic failure, but the organic parts of his body were intact. He would live, though he would spend months relearning how to function without technological enhancement. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his defeat. Thane had been a pawn in a larger game, a symbol the Federation had used to demonstrate their version of human improvement. His destruction proved nothing except that the Council's philosophy was flawed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Sarah's chief medical officer, ran scanners over the bone armor to check for damage. The crystalline structure of Raktor's remains had held up perfectly, showing no signs of stress or fracture despite the violent combat. "The biointegration is even better than we hoped," Elena reported. "The armor is actually becoming more efficient as it adapts to your movement patterns. It's almost like it's learning." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Zephyrian bone structure was semi-sentient, capable of limited adaptation to environmental pressures. Wearing Vraktor's remains wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. The armor was literally evolving to make her a more effective fighter. "Any word on the second opponent?" Sarah asked as she checked her weapons. The blade forged from Vraktor's claws had performed flawlessly, but she wanted to be certain the edge remained sharp. Elena's expression darkened. "The Federation Council is still debating. They're arguing about how to respond to what just happened. Half of them want to escalate dramatically. The other half are suggesting they might be making a mistake." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the arena, Sarah could see maintenance crews preparing the terrain for the next match. The African savanna was dissolving, replaced by something that made her stomach clench with apprehension. They were building an ocean, not just a pool or a lake, but a genuine marine environment complete with artificial currents, pressure zones, and what appeared to be a complex ecosystem of predatory sea life. The arena floor had become a 3-dimensional aquatic battlefield that extended both above and below the waterline. "They're bringing in a Leviathan," Elena said quietly. "Kethmara, the Depthbreaker. She's never lost a match in aquatic environments." Sarah had studied the Leviathan species during her preparation for the tournament. They were apex predators from a water world in the Vega system, evolved for 3-dimensional combat in environments where humans would be at a massive disadvantage. Kethmara could hold her breath for hours, navigate by echolocation, and move through water with the grace of a living torpedo. More troubling was her psychological profile. Unlike Thane, who had fought with reluctant duty, Kethmara enjoyed killing. She collected trophies from her defeated opponents and had personally requested the honor of facing the bone-wearing primitive in her preferred environment. "She's not just trying to defeat me," Sarah realized. "She wants to drown me slowly." Elena handed her a breathing apparatus designed specifically for the match. It would provide 40 minutes of air, enough time for a standard arena combat under normal circumstances. But nothing about this tournament was normal. There's something else, Elena continued. Our intelligence contacts in the Federation military are reporting unusual movement. Combat fleets positioning near human colonies. Invasion forces being mobilized under the guise of training exercises. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the arena's climate control. They're planning to invade regardless of the outcome, aren't they? It's looking that way. This tournament was never about justice or honor. It was about providing a legal justification for what they were going to do anyway. The implications were staggering. Even if Sarah somehow managed to defeat all three champions, the Federation Council could simply declare the results invalid and proceed with their original plan. Humanity would be enslaved or exterminated either way. Then why are we even doing this? Sarah asked. Elena smiled grimly. Because 50 million beings are watching. Every species in the galaxy is seeing what humans are capable of when we stop apologizing for what we are. Win or lose, you're changing how they think about us. The call came for Sarah to return to the arena. She checked her equipment one final time, making certain that every piece of gear was optimally configured for aquatic combat. The bone armor would actually be an advantage underwater. Zephyrian skeletal structure was naturally buoyant, allowing for precise control of depth and movement. More importantly, Sarah had spent the last 6 months preparing for exactly this scenario. The Federation Council assumed that humans were land-based creatures who would be helpless in an aquatic environment. They were partially correct. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters on dry land, not as aquatic predators, but they had forgotten something crucial about human nature: adaptability. Sarah's ancestors had crossed oceans in wooden boats. They had developed techniques for underwater hunting that predated civilization itself. They had learned to hold their breath for impossible lengths of time, and to navigate by reading the subtle movements of water and current. Those skills had been refined by modern military training. Sarah was a qualified combat diver with experience in every type of aquatic environment, from Arctic seas to tropical coral reefs. She understood three-dimensional tactics in ways that most species couldn't comprehend. The arena doors opened, revealing the completed ocean environment. The water was crystal clear, allowing spectators to observe combat at any depth through the arena's transparent walls. Artificial currents created complex flow patterns that would challenge even experienced aquatic fighters. Kethmara was already in the water, her massive form cutting through the artificial waves with predatory grace. She stood over 8 feet tall with a streamlined body covered in scales that shifted color to match her surroundings. Her forearms ended in webbed hands tipped with retractable claws designed for gripping prey. Most intimidating were her jaws, which could unhinge like a snake's to swallow objects much larger than her head. Little land crawler. Her voice carried clearly through the water thanks to the arena's acoustic systems. I will make your death quick if you surrender now. Continue this foolishness and I will let you drown slowly while I feast on your entrails. Sarah dove into the artificial ocean without hesitation. The bone armor adjusted immediately to the aquatic environment, its crystalline structure optimizing her hydrodynamics while maintaining full protection. She sank to a depth of 30 feet before stabilizing her buoyancy and beginning to circle. You know what your mistake is, Kethmara? Sarah's voice carried through the water with surprising clarity. You think this is your territory. The Leviathan laughed, a sound like grinding coral that made the artificial fish scatter in terror. This is an ocean, primitive, my domain. Your people barely evolved past crawling on land. You have no place here. Sarah smiled behind her breathing apparatus. My species didn't evolve in the ocean. We conquered it anyway. The battle began with Kethmara demonstrating why she had never lost an aquatic match. She moved through the water with impossible speed, using her forearms to generate propulsion while her powerful tail provided steering. Her echolocation ability allowed her to track Sarah's position even when visual contact was impossible. But Sarah had studied the recordings of Kethmara's previous matches. The Leviathan was a perfect aquatic predator, but she fought like one. Her tactics were based on intimidation, overwhelming force, and the assumption that her opponents would panic when faced with a superior aquatic fighter. Sarah didn't panic. Instead, she did something that no Federation warrior had ever seen before. She began to hunt. Human persistence hunting relied on tracking prey over vast distances, wearing them down through superior endurance and tactical planning. Sarah adapted those techniques to three-dimensional aquatic combat. Using the arena's current patterns to her advantage, while forcing Kethamara to expend energy on dramatic attacks that never quite connected. The Leviathan's frustration was evident, as Sarah remained just out of reach, never presenting an easy target but never fleeing either. Kethamara was used to opponents who either tried to match her aquatic superiority or who retreated to the arena's shallow areas where they felt more comfortable. Sarah did neither. She owned the water. 20 minutes into the match, Kethamara made her first serious mistake. Frustrated by Sarah's evasive tactics, she attempted a devastating attack that involved channeling all her speed into a single devastating charge. Her claws extended, her jaws unhinged, and she rocketed through the water like a living missile. Sarah was ready. At the last possible moment, she twisted aside and grabbed Kethamara's trailing arm, using the Leviathan's own momentum to redirect her into one of the arena's artificial coral formations. The impact stunned Kethamara, but she recovered quickly. Too quickly to press the advantage safely, Sarah retreated to a safe distance and continued her patient stalking pattern. "Stand still and fight," Kethamara roared, her psychic voice carrying frustrated rage. "Stop running like prey." "I'm not running," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm teaching you what it feels like to be hunted." The psychological impact was immediate. For the first time in her career, Kethamara found herself in the position of prey rather than predator. Sarah's relentless pursuit, combined with her refusal to engage in the kind of dramatic combat that Leviathans expected, was undermining everything Kethamara thought she knew about warfare. The psychological warfare was working better than Sarah had hoped. Kethamara's attacks became increasingly desperate as the match progressed, each failed assault draining more of her energy and confidence. The Leviathan was discovering what countless Earth predators had learned over millions of years. Being stalked by a human was a uniquely terrifying experience. Sarah maintained her patient hunting pattern, staying just outside Kethamara's striking range while gradually wearing down her opponent's stamina. The bone armor provided perfect buoyancy control, allowing her to hover motionlessly in the water for minutes at a time before suddenly appearing from an unexpected angle. "What are you?" Kethamara gasped during a brief lull in combat. Her scales had shifted to deep purple, a color that indicated severe stress in Leviathan physiology. No land species should be able to move like that in deep water. Sarah's response was to demonstrate another uniquely human adaptation. She hyperventilated briefly to saturate her blood with oxygen, then took the deepest breath her lungs could hold and removed her breathing apparatus entirely. The crowd fell silent as Sarah dove toward the deepest part of the artificial ocean, her body cutting through the water with mechanical precision. She wasn't just holding her breath. She was entering a physiological state that most galactic species couldn't achieve, the mammalian diving reflex. Her heart rate slowed dramatically. Blood flow redirected from her extremities to protect her vital organs. Her metabolism shifted to conserve oxygen at the cellular level. These were adaptations that had allowed her ancestors to dive for pearls and hunt seals beneath Arctic ice. Kethamara followed, confident that she could force Sarah to surface when her primitive lungs gave out. The Leviathan could hold her breath for hours if necessary. No land-based species could match that capability. She was about to learn that human biology was more complex than Federation science understood. At a depth of 60 feet, Sarah suddenly reversed direction and launched herself upward with explosive force. Her timing was perfect. Kethamara was directly above her, focused on the surface and anticipating Sarah's eventual need to breathe. The bone blade struck between Kethamara's scales with surgical precision, targeting a nerve cluster that would paralyze her swimming ability without causing permanent damage. Sarah had studied Leviathan anatomy for months, memorizing every vulnerability and pressure point. Kethamara thrashed in agony as her nervous system shut down her ability to coordinate movement. She began to sink toward the bottom of the artificial ocean, her massive body suddenly as helpless as a falling stone. Sarah could have finished her then. The blade was positioned perfectly to sever Kethamara's spinal cord. Instead, she grabbed the paralyzed Leviathan and began swimming toward the surface. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Sarah hauled her defeated opponent to safety, performing rescue breathing to ensure Kethamara didn't drown while paralyzed. It was an act of mercy that no Federation warrior had ever shown in the arena. "Why?" Kethamara whispered when she regained consciousness in the shallow area of the artificial ocean. "I would have killed you slowly." "Why save me?" Sarah checked the Leviathan's vital signs to ensure she was stable. Because killing you wouldn't have proven anything except that I could kill you. Saving you proves something much more important. What? That humans don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because we have to. There's a difference. The arena medics arrived to stabilize Kethmara while Sarah prepared for extraction. Her breathing apparatus had been underwater for nearly an hour, but her extended dive had lasted only 12 minutes, well within human physiological limits, but far beyond what any Federation species thought possible. Elena was waiting in the medical bay with troubling news. The Council is furious. They're claiming you used illegal enhancement techniques. No unmodified biological organism should be able to hold its breath that long or dive to those depths. Sarah laughed as she stripped out of the soaked bone armor. They really don't understand human physiology, do they? We're persistence hunters, Elena. Our bodies are designed for extended endurance in hostile environments. What they call impossible, we call Tuesday. It gets worse, Elena continued. They're accelerating the schedule. Instead of giving you the standard recovery period, they want the final match to begin in 2 hours. Sarah paused in her preparation routine. 2 hours? What's the rush? Our intelligence sources think they're getting pressure from their military commanders. Every minute this tournament continues, it becomes harder to justify the invasion fleets they've positioned around human colonies. The longer you keep winning, the more questions their own people start asking. The third and final opponent was already being prepared. Sarah could see the arena crews working frantically to configure the terrain for a combat environment that would challenge everything she had learned in the previous matches. "Who is it?" Sarah asked. Elena's expression was grim. Commander Xylox Prime, the Federation's most decorated military officer. He's not just a champion, he's the architect of their entire military philosophy. Sarah knew the name. Every human military officer did. Xylox Prime had designed the tactical doctrines that had allowed the Federation to maintain control over 3,000 star systems. He was personally responsible for crushing 17 rebellions and had never lost a battle in over 2 centuries of service. More concerning was his species. The architects were energy beings who could manipulate matter at the molecular level. They didn't just wear armor or carry weapons. They became whatever they needed to become, reshaping their essence to match any combat situation. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "Intelligence reports that Xylox Prime specifically requested this match. He sees you as a threat to everything the Federation represents. He's not trying to defeat you quickly. He wants to break you completely." Sarah began her preparation ritual, checking every piece of equipment with methodical precision. The bone armor had performed flawlessly in both previous matches, adapting to each environment while maintaining its protective capabilities. Fraktor's claws had held their edge despite repeated combat stress, but facing an architect would require something more than superior equipment and human adaptability. Xylox Prime could become anything Sarah could imagine and several things she couldn't. He had access to the collected military knowledge of every species in the Federation. "What's the terrain setup?" Sarah asked. "Multi-environment. They're dividing the arena into sections that represent different planetary conditions. Desert, Arctic, jungle, volcanic, zero gravity, and something they're calling a reality distortion field that I don't even pretend to understand." Sarah nodded grimly. The Federation Council was forcing her to face their ultimate champion in an environment designed to test every possible combat skill. There would be no single advantage she could exploit, no predictable weakness she could target. This would be a pure test of what humans could accomplish when stripped of every advantage, except their fundamental nature. "Elena," Sarah said as she made her final preparations, "if I don't make it back from this one, I want you to make sure the recordings get distributed to every human colony. People need to see what we're capable of when we stop apologizing for what we are." "You're going to make it back," Elena replied firmly, "because you're not just fighting for humanity anymore. Half the galaxy is rooting for you now. Species that have been ground down by Federation arrogance for centuries are finally seeing someone fight back effectively." Sarah sealed the bone armor's connections and checked her weapons one final time. The blade felt warm in her hands, as if some echo of Raktor's warrior spirit was preparing for the ultimate test. Through the observation windows, she could see the arena being prepared for what everyone expected would be the final match of the tournament. One way or another, the next few hours would determine humanity's place in the galaxy. The Federation Council wanted to prove that their technological superiority and military doctrine were absolute. They had chosen their greatest champion to demonstrate that primitive species could never overcome advanced civilization. Sarah intended to prove them wrong, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the one advantage that humans had never lost: the ability to adapt, survive, and thrive in situations that should have been impossible. She was about to teach the galaxy that sometimes the most dangerous opponent was the one who had nothing left to lose. The arena had been transformed into something that defied conventional understanding of combat spaces. 6 distinct environmental zones radiated from a central platform, each one representing a different type of planetary condition that Federation forces might encounter. The transitions between zones were abrupt and unforgiving, creating boundaries that would challenge even the most adaptable fighters. Sarah studied the terrain from the staging area, identifying the tactical advantages and disadvantages of each section. The desert zone featured shifting sand dunes and extreme heat that would test endurance. The Arctic section included ice formations and sub-zero temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in seconds. The jungle area was dense with vegetation that could provide cover or concealment, but also harbored artificial predators. Most challenging were the volcanic zone with its unstable footing and toxic gas emissions, the zero-gravity section that eliminated conventional movement patterns, and the reality distortion field that seemed to bend space and time in ways that hurt to look at directly. Commander Xylox Prime was already in the arena, demonstrating his species' unique abilities for the crowd's entertainment. His base form resembled a column of living light wrapped in geometric patterns, but he shifted constantly between configurations. One moment he appeared as a crystalline warrior similar to Vractor. The next he flowed like liquid mercury before solidifying into something that resembled a mechanical construct. Impressive, isn't it? Dr. Elena Vasquez observed as she made final adjustments to Sarah's equipment. He's showing off, letting everyone see how versatile he can be. Sarah nodded, but she wasn't intimidated by the display. If anything, Xylox Prime's shape-shifting demonstration was providing valuable intelligence. She could see the energy patterns that preceded each transformation, the brief moments of vulnerability when he shifted from one form to another. He's making a mistake, Sarah realized. He's so focused on showing everyone how adaptable he is that he's revealing his limitations. Elena raised an eyebrow. What limitations? He can become anything he wants. No, he can't, Sarah replied, her tactical mind processing what she had observed. He can only become things he understands. Each transformation is based on existing patterns in his memory. He's not creating new forms. He's copying old ones. The insight was crucial. Architects were masters of adaptation, but their shape-shifting ability was constrained by their knowledge and experience. Xylox Prime could become a perfect replica of any warrior he had encountered, but he couldn't innovate beyond those parameters. Sarah, on the other hand, was about to introduce him to something completely outside his experience: human unpredictability. The arena timer began its final countdown. Sarah checked the bone armor one last time, feeling the subtle vibration that indicated Vractor's crystalline structure was resonating with some form of energy in the arena. The Zephyrian remains were reacting to Xylox Prime's presence, almost as if they recognized a worthy opponent. Remember, Elena said as the staging area doors prepared to open, he's going to try to get inside your head. Architects are psychic. He can read surface thoughts and emotional states. Don't give him anything useful, Sarah smiled grimly. Elena, I've been planning this fight for 6 months. The thoughts I'm going to show him are exactly what I want him to see. The arena doors opened, and Sarah stepped into the multi-environmental battlefield that would determine humanity's fate. The crowd's roar was deafening, but she noticed something different from the previous matches. The cheering wasn't uniformly hostile anymore. Entire sections of alien spectators were supporting her now, species that had grown tired of Federation dominance and wanted to see their champions challenged. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Xylox Prime's voice resonated directly inside her mind, bypassing her physical hearing entirely. You have exceeded expectations, but this is where your primitive tactics reach their limit. I am the perfection of military evolution. I can become anything you can imagine fighting and several things you cannot. Sarah walked calmly toward the center platform, her movements confident despite the massive disadvantage she faced. Commander, you're absolutely right. You can become anything I can imagine fighting. She paused at the edge of the central platform, looking directly at Xylox Prime's shifting energy form. But that's also your weakness. You can only fight the way you know how to fight. You've never faced anything like me before. Xylox Prime's form solidified into something resembling a Federation battle android, complete with advanced weaponry and armor plating. And what exactly do you think you represent that I have not encountered before? Sarah's response was to do something that shocked every observer in the arena. She removed the bone armor entirely. Piece by piece, she stripped away Vraktor's remains and placed them carefully on the platform beside her. The crowd fell silent as Sarah stood in the arena wearing only her basic combat suit, apparently defenseless against one of the most powerful warriors in galactic history. I represent humanity without apologies, Sarah said clearly. Not the version the Federation wants us to become. Not the enhanced or modified or improved version. Just us, exactly as we are. Xylox Prime's confusion was evident even through his alien psychology. You are removing your primary defense? This is either madness or the most sophisticated psychological warfare I have ever encountered. Neither, Sarah replied, as she drew the blade forged from Vraktor's claws. It was her only remaining piece of equipment beyond the basic combat suit. This is honesty. The match began with Xylox Prime demonstrating exactly why he was considered the Federation's ultimate military asset. He flowed through multiple forms in rapid succession, adapting his shape and capabilities to match whatever threat Sarah might present. First a ranged fighter with energy weapons, then a close combat specialist with bladed appendages, then something that resembled a living siege engine. Sarah dodged and evaded, staying mobile and refusing to engage directly. To the crowd, it looked like she was simply postponing the inevitable. But those watching more carefully noticed something strange about her movement patterns. She wasn't trying to avoid Xylox Prime's attacks. She was studying them. Every time he transformed, Sarah observed the energy patterns and tactical approaches he employed. She was building a comprehensive understanding of how architects fought, what assumptions they made, and where their thinking patterns were most rigid. Stop running and fight, Xylox Prime commanded, his frustration beginning to show. You cannot defeat me through evasion. I'm not evading, Sarah replied calmly. I'm learning. The next phase of her plan required perfect timing. Sarah allowed herself to be cornered in the desert section of the arena, apparently trapped between sand dunes with nowhere to retreat. Xylox Prime transformed into his most intimidating configuration yet, a massive predator that combined the best features of every apex hunter in the galaxy. He charged across the sand with unstoppable force, certain that he had finally cornered his elusive prey. Sarah waited until the last possible moment, then did something that violated every principle of Federation combat doctrine. She surrendered, not to Xylox Prime, but to the environment itself. Instead of fighting the shifting sand beneath her feet, she embraced it. Her body went completely limp, allowing the unstable footing to carry her in directions that no rigid tactical system could predict. Xylox Prime's charge carried him past her position, as Sarah seemed to flow like water around his attack. She wasn't fighting the desert. She was becoming part of it. Impossible, Xylox Prime muttered as he struggled to recalibrate his sensors. No biological organism can move like that. Sarah emerged from the sand behind him, moving with a fluidity that defied conventional physics. You're right. No biological organism moves like that. But humans aren't just biological organisms. We're survivors. Her counterattack began in earnest, not with overwhelming force or superior technology, but with something far more dangerous: absolute adaptability. Sarah flowed from environment to environment, becoming whatever she needed to become in each zone. In the Arctic section, she moved like someone born to ice and snow. In the jungle, she became a shadow that used every piece of vegetation as both cover and weapon. In the volcanic zone, she danced between lava flows with the confidence of someone who understood that environment intimately. Xylox Prime followed, transforming constantly to match each new challenge. But Sarah was always one step ahead, not because she was faster or stronger, but because she understood something that architects couldn't comprehend. Adaptation wasn't about becoming the perfect form for each situation. It was about becoming the right form for the situation you found yourself in, even if that situation was completely unexpected. The zero-gravity section was where Sarah's advantage became overwhelming. Xylox Prime's transformations were designed for planetary combat with consistent gravitational fields. He struggled to maintain coherent form in the weightless environment. Sarah, however, had trained for zero-gravity combat since joining the human military. She moved through the space like a three-dimensional dancer, using tiny pushes and redirections to control her momentum with precision that seemed supernatural. How? Xylox Prime demanded as Sarah outmaneuvered his increasingly desperate attacks. Your species evolved on a single planet with consistent gravity. You should be helpless here. Sarah's answer came as she guided both of them toward the reality distortion field, the arena's most dangerous section. We didn't evolve for space, Commander. We conquered it anyway. That's what humans do. We take environments that should kill us and make them our homes. The reality distortion field was meant to be the arena's ultimate challenge, a space where normal physics didn't apply and conventional tactics became meaningless. Sarah entered it without hesitation, accepting the disorientation and confusion as simply another environment to master. Xylox Prime followed reluctantly, his energy form flickering as the distorted space interfered with his molecular cohesion. He was finally experiencing something his species had never encountered, an environment that resisted his fundamental nature. Sarah, meanwhile, was doing what humans had always done when faced with impossible conditions. She was adapting. The reality distortion field was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Space folded in on itself, creating impossible geometries where up and down became meaningless concepts. Time moved in stuttering loops, making it difficult to distinguish between past and future actions. The very air seemed to vibrate with energies that made her teeth ache and her vision blur. But humans had always excelled at functioning in environments that defied logic. Sarah's ancestors had navigated by stars that moved across alien skies, had survived in deserts where mirages made reality questionable, had functioned in deep ocean trenches where pressure and darkness created sensory nightmares. The key was not to fight the distortion, but to accept it as simply another set of rules to learn and exploit. Xylox Prime was struggling badly. His energy form flickered constantly as the distorted space interfered with his molecular cohesion. Architects were beings of pure order, their shape-shifting abilities dependent on understanding and controlling the fundamental forces of reality. In an environment where those forces behaved unpredictably, his greatest strength became a liability. "This is madness," he transmitted, his mental voice distorted by the field's effects. No rational tactical system can function in this chaos. Sarah moved through the impossible space with growing confidence, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated when reality would shift around her. "That's your problem, Commander. You're trying to apply rational tactics to an irrational situation," she demonstrated by allowing herself to fall toward what appeared to be a solid surface, only to pass through it, as if it were an illusion. At the same moment, she struck at where Xylox Prime's form would be if space were folded differently than it appeared. The blade found its target, disrupting his energy matrix and forcing him to retreat. "How are you adapting so quickly?" Xylox Prime demanded. "This environment should be equally disorienting for both of us." "It is disorienting," Sarah admitted. "The difference is that I'm comfortable being disoriented. Humans have been dealing with chaos for our entire evolutionary history. We learned to thrive in uncertainty." The psychological impact of her words was as important as the physical combat. Xylox Prime had built his reputation on the ability to become whatever his enemies needed him to become, to adapt faster and more completely than any opponent could match. Discovering that a supposedly primitive species could out-adapt him was shaking his fundamental understanding of warfare. Sarah pressed her advantage, not through direct assault but through something far more devastating. She began teaching him what it felt like to be outmatched. Every time Xylox Prime transformed to counter her attacks, Sarah changed tactics in ways that made his adaptations irrelevant. When he became a ranged fighter, she closed to melee distance through routes that the distortion field made impossible to predict. When he shifted to close combat configuration, she used the field's temporal loops to attack him from directions he couldn't anticipate. Most unsettling for the Architect Commander was Sarah's apparent ability to function effectively, even when the reality distortions made conventional planning impossible. She fought by instinct and improvisation, qualities that his species had systematically eliminated from their military doctrine. "Stop this," Xylox Prime commanded, his energy form beginning to destabilize under the combined stress of the distortion field and Sarah's relentless assault. "You are fighting without logic, without strategy. This is not how civilized warfare is conducted." Sarah's response was to guide their combat toward the edge of the distortion field, where normal space resumed. As they crossed the boundary, she turned to face him directly for the first time since entering the chaotic zone. "That's exactly my point, Commander. You fight like warfare is a mathematical equation where the side with better technology always wins. But war isn't math. It's about adapting to situations that nobody could have predicted." Back in normal space, Xylox Prime immediately began the process of restabilizing his energy matrix. But the damage from the distortion field had been cumulative. His transformations were slower now, less precise. More importantly, his confidence had been shaken by Sarah's performance in an environment that should have been equally hostile to both fighters. Sarah, meanwhile, began moving systematically through the remaining environmental zones, forcing Xylox Prime to follow her from one challenge to another. She wasn't trying to defeat him in any single environment. She was wearing him down through the simple expedient of making him adapt constantly, while she remained consistently unpredictable. In the volcanic zone, she used the unstable footing and toxic gases as weapons, leading Xylox Prime into areas where his energy form would be most vulnerable to environmental interference. In the jungle section, she disappeared completely into the artificial ecosystem, striking from concealment in ways that violated every principle of honorable combat that architects respected. "This is guerrilla warfare," Xylox Prime accused as he struggled to track her through the dense vegetation. "Primitive tactics that civilized species abandoned millennia ago." "Primitive?" Sarah's voice came from somewhere in the canopy above him. "Commander, these tactics defeated the most advanced military in human history. Multiple times. Technology doesn't win wars. People do." Her next attack came from below, where she had tunneled through the soft jungle soil to emerge directly beneath his position. The blade forged from Vraktor's claws pierced his energy matrix at its most vulnerable point, disrupting the quantum patterns that maintained his coherence. Xylox Prime's scream of pain echoed across the arena as his carefully maintained form began to collapse. For the first time in his centuries-long career, he was truly hurt, truly vulnerable, truly afraid. "Impossible," he gasped as he struggled to maintain basic cohesion. "You cannot be winning. The tactical analysis is clear. My capabilities far exceed yours in every measurable category." Sarah emerged from the jungle, her combat suit torn and stained, but her determination unshaken. "You're right about the measurements, Commander. You're faster, stronger, more versatile, and more experienced than I am. But you're fighting the wrong war." She gestured toward the crowd of 50 million beings who were watching in stunned silence. "You're fighting to prove Federation superiority. I'm fighting to prove that being inferior on paper doesn't mean being defeated in reality." Xylox Prime made one final attempt to regain control of the battle. He transformed into his most powerful configuration yet, a form that combined the deadliest aspects of every apex predator in galactic history. The energy patterns surrounding him were so intense that they began affecting the arena's environmental controls. But Sarah was ready for his desperation move. She had been preparing for this moment since the beginning of the match. Studying his transformation patterns and energy signatures, she knew exactly how his ultimate form would function and precisely where its weaknesses would be. Instead of retreating or trying to match his power, Sarah did something that shocked everyone watching. She walked directly toward him, blade lowered, apparently surrendering to his overwhelming might. "You think you've won?" she said calmly as deadly energy crackled around Xylox Prime's transformed state. "But you've just made the same mistake that every Federation opponent makes." "What mistake?" Xylox Prime demanded, preparing to deliver the killing blow that would end both the match and humanity's challenge to Federation authority. Sarah smiled as she reached the optimal position for her final gambit. "You assumed that overwhelming force was the same thing as victory." Her attack wasn't aimed at Xylox Prime's transformed body. Instead, she struck at the quantum resonance pattern that maintained his energy matrix's coherence. It was a precision strike that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. If she missed, his counterattack would destroy her instantly. She didn't miss. The blade pierced the exact point where Xylox Prime's consciousness intersected with his shape-shifting abilities. Not to destroy him, but to temporarily disconnect him from his power. For one crucial moment, the greatest military mind in Federation history found himself trapped in whatever form he happened to be wearing when the disconnect occurred. It was a form he had never intended to maintain. The hybrid configuration he had been shifting into when Sarah's strike landed. Half predator, half energy being, unstable and unable to adapt to changing circumstances. Sarah's follow-up. The Federation Council's chambers had never seen chaos like this. Representatives from 3,000 star systems were arguing simultaneously, their voices creating a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm the translation systems. Some demanded that Sarah's victories be declared invalid. Others insisted that the entire tournament had been a farce designed to justify predetermined aggression against humanity. Sarah stood in the center of it all, still wearing Vraktor's bone armor as the galaxy's most powerful beings decided her species' fate. The armor felt warm against her skin, as if the Zephyrian warrior's spirit was offering silent support for whatever came next. Chancellor Vexthara, the ancient crystalline who had ruled the Federation for over a millennium, finally called for order. Her voice resonated through quantum harmonics that forced every being in the chamber to stop speaking and listen. "The human has fulfilled the terms of the combat trial," she announced, her words carrying the weight of absolute law. 3 Federation champions have acknowledged defeat. According to our own legal code, humanity's actions regarding the Zephyrian bone armor must be considered lawful. A wave of angry protest erupted from the military faction, led by Fleet Admiral Corvin of the hegemony species. The trials were a meaningless spectacle. Primitive tactics defeating superior doctrine proves nothing except that our champions were inadequately prepared. On the contrary, interrupted Ambassador Thys from the Mindweaver Collective, the trials proved exactly what they were designed to prove. That human customs, however distasteful we might find them, are legitimate expressions of their cultural identity. Sarah remained silent, understanding that her role in this debate was to serve as a symbol rather than a participant. The real argument wasn't about her actions or even humanity's place in the Federation. It was about the fundamental question of whether technological superiority gave one species the right to dictate values to another. Chancellor Vexthara consulted the quantum data core that contained the Federation's complete legal history. The law is clear. The human Chen has proven her people's right to maintain their traditional customs. The charges of barbarism and cultural violation are dismissed. But Fleet Admiral Corvin wasn't finished. Even if we accept the legal ruling, the practical problem remains. Humanity represents a destabilizing influence on galactic civilization. Their unpredictable nature and primitive instincts make them unsuitable for continued Federation membership. "Then we expel them," suggested Councillor Wraith of the Silicon Communes. "Remove them from Federation protection and let them develop naturally without our interference." Sarah felt a cold chill as she realized the trap that had been set. Even in victory, humanity faced destruction. Without Federation protection, human colonies would be vulnerable to every predatory species in the galaxy. Expulsion would be slower than invasion, but just as final. "There is another option," a new voice interjected. The chamber fell silent as Xylox Prime entered, his energy form still flickering from the damage he had sustained in their fight. He moved slowly, painfully, but with unmistakable determination. "Commander," Chancellor Vexthara acknowledged, "your presence was not requested." "My presence is necessary," Xylox Prime replied. "I have something to say about the human and her species that this council needs to hear." Fleet Admiral Corvin's hostility was immediate. "You were defeated by primitive tactics. Your opinion is hardly relevant to strategic decisions." Xylox Prime's energy form flared with controlled anger. "I was defeated by something far more significant than primitive tactics, Admiral. I was defeated by a form of warfare that our entire military doctrine has forgotten how to counter." He turned his attention to the full council, his mental voice carrying absolute conviction. "For 3,000 cycles we have built our supremacy on the assumption that technological advancement equals military superiority. We have created armies of specialists, each one perfectly adapted to specific combat scenarios. We have reduced warfare to a mathematical equation where the side with better specifications always wins. And we have been successful," Chancellor Vexthara observed. "The Federation has maintained peace and order across the galaxy." "We have maintained control," Xylox Prime corrected. "But we have not been tested by anything genuinely unexpected until now." Lieutenant Chen didn't defeat me because she was stronger or faster or better equipped. She defeated me because she represented something our tactical systems cannot account for. Genuine unpredictability. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as she realized where Xylox Prime's argument was leading. The human species possesses something that we have systematically eliminated from our own military forces, he continued. The ability to adapt to completely novel situations without predetermined tactical frameworks. They don't just learn new techniques. They create entirely new approaches to problems that shouldn't have solutions. You're suggesting that humanity's primitive nature is actually an advantage? Ambassador Thiss asked skeptically. I'm suggesting that it's the most dangerous advantage any species could possess, Xylox Prime replied. Humans don't fight the way they're supposed to fight. They don't lose when they're supposed to lose. They don't accept that certain situations are impossible to overcome. The implications were beginning to dawn on the council members. Sarah could see the shift in their expressions as they processed what Xylox Prime was really saying. In the arena, I could become anything I needed to become to counter Lieutenant Chen's attacks, Xylox Prime explained. But I could only become things I already knew how to become. She, on the other hand, kept becoming things that had never existed before. Fighting styles that couldn't be catalogued. Tactical approaches that violated every principle of logical warfare. Fleet Admiral Corvin's hostility was replaced by genuine concern. You're saying they're a threat to galactic stability. I'm saying they're a threat to our assumption that we understand what galactic stability requires, Xylox Prime corrected. Every military doctrine we've developed assumes that our enemies will fight according to recognizable patterns. Humans don't have recognizable patterns. They improvise. Chancellor Vexthara was quiet for a long moment, processing the strategic implications. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of governmental decision. Commander Xylox Prime, you are recommending immediate military action against humanity? No, Xylox Prime replied, surprising everyone in the chamber. I'm recommending something far more radical. I'm recommending that we recruit them. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized that Xylox Prime was about to propose something that would change everything. The Federation has grown complacent, he continued. We have spent 3,000 cycles fighting enemies who think the way we think, who follow tactical doctrines we understand, who can be defeated by superior technology and established strategy. What happens when we encounter something truly alien, something that doesn't follow any of our assumptions about how warfare should work? Humans, Ambassador Thiss said quietly. You're saying humans are our preparation for fighting something truly alien. I'm saying humans are something truly alien, Xylox Prime corrected. And if they can learn to direct their unpredictability in service of Federation goals rather than against them, they could become our greatest asset rather than our greatest threat. Sarah finally found her voice. What exactly are you proposing, Commander? Xylox Prime's energy form shifted to focus directly on her. I'm proposing that humanity be given a new role in the Federation. Not as junior members following established protocols, but as tactical specialists responsible for developing responses to completely novel threats. Irregular warfare, Chancellor Vexthara mused. You want to weaponize their unpredictability. I want to channel their unpredictability, Xylox Prime clarified. Give them problems that our conventional forces can't solve. Let them develop solutions that our military doctrine says shouldn't work. Use their ability to improvise as a strategic resource, rather than treating it as a dangerous aberration. Fleet Admiral Corvin was skeptical. And you believe they can be trusted with such responsibility? Sarah answered before Xylox Prime could respond. Admiral, you've spent the last several hours watching me prove that humans fight hardest when we're protecting something we value. Give us something worth protecting, and you'll never have to worry about our loyalty. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members argued that humanity was too dangerous to be given any significant role in Federation affairs. Others contended that their demonstrated abilities made them too valuable to waste. In the end, it was Chancellor Vexthara who proposed the compromise that would reshape galactic civilization. Humanity will be granted full Federation membership, she announced. But they will serve in a specialized capacity. Human forces will be responsible for addressing tactical problems that conventional Federation doctrine cannot solve. They will operate with significant autonomy, but under overall Federation command structure. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. It wasn't the outcome she had expected, but it was better than extermination or expulsion. There is one additional condition, Chancellor Vexus Thera continued. Lieutenant Chen will serve as the primary liaison between human forces and Federation command. Her performance in the arena has demonstrated that she understands both human capabilities and Federation requirements. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the weight of responsibility that was being placed on her shoulders. She would be representing not just her own career, but her entire species' place in galactic civilization. As the council session concluded and the various representatives began filing out of the chamber, Xylox Prime approached her one final time. Lieutenant, he said quietly, I want you to understand something. What I proposed today wasn't mercy. It was recognition of a tactical reality. Your species is dangerous in ways that most beings cannot comprehend. The choice was between making you our enemies or making you our allies. Sarah met his gaze steadily, and you chose to make us your allies. I chose to make you our secret weapon, Xylox Prime corrected. The galaxy is vast, Lieutenant Chen. There are threats out there that we haven't encountered yet, problems that we don't know how to solve. When those challenges arise, humanity will be our answer to the impossible. As Sarah left the Federation Council chambers, still wearing the bone armor that had started this entire journey, she reflected on the irony of her situation. She had set out to prove that humans had the right to maintain their traditional customs. Instead, she had convinced the galaxy's most powerful civilization to build their future around humanity's most dangerous characteristics. The bone armor felt warm against her skin, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories came from embracing what others saw as weaknesses. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not by becoming what the Federation wanted them to be, but by proving that what they already were was exactly what the galaxy needed. The universe was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they stopped apologizing for their nature and started using it as a weapon.